Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into our slippers, embroidered ones naturally, and strolling through the cobbled alleys of 16th century Istanbul. The air is soft and still. A low breeze carries the scent of clove, roasted barley, and something darker, something richer. Something richer. That smell? It's coffee, freshly roasted, thick as syrup, and strong enough to wake a camel. You're not dreaming yet, but you will be. Ottoman mornings don't start with alarms. They start with the clatter of copper trays and the hiss of a sand-filled stove. Somewhere nearby, a vendor adjusts his fez and flips his signboard open with a gentle grunt. And from the second-floor window of a crooked wooden house, a neighbor lowers a tiny basket on a rope, her usual way of ordering coffee without putting on shoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Istanbul, though the locals still call it the city, as if no other city matters. The year is 1575. And the Ottoman Empire is a whirl of spice and ceremony. A muezzin's call winds through the rooftops, while baker boys yell about simit rings hot from the oven. And then beneath it all, that smell again. Coffee. You follow it. At first it doesn't seem like much, a smoky booth wedged between a barber and a scroll vendor. But inside, the world changes. Smoke curls upward like forgotten prayers, and the tables are low, made of carved walnut worn smooth by elbows, secrets, and spilled cups. The clientele is serious. Scholars, poets, beggars with opinions, all silently sipping dark liquid from porcelain bowls, so delicate you can see the light glow through them. It isn't just a cafe, it's a kahvehane, and you're about to learn that in this empire, coffee isn't a drink, it's a ritual, a symbol, a threat even. In Ottoman society, this bitter brew could seal a treaty, provoke a rebellion, or quietly rearrange the ranks of the imperial court. Coffee isn't just fuel, it's politics in a porcelain cup. And those beans you smell, they've come a long way, most likely from Yemen, home of the legendary port of Mocha, where the highlands birthed beans so potent they were almost holy. The Ottomans called them kahwa, a name whispered with reverence. To get them here took caravans, bribes, the occasional camel uprising, and a network of smugglers more reliable than most diplomats. It was the 16th century version of Starbucks logistics, minus the frappuccinos. Historians still argue whether Sultan Selim II ever actually drank coffee himself. Some say he banned it, others claim he had his own private blend laced with rosewater and cloves. What we do know is that his court was full of men, and a few daring women, who lived and schemed over cups of the stuff. There were eunuchs who carried trays of it between palace chambers, pages who rehearsed the exact number of times to stir without splashing, and whole divisions of palace staff, who existed just to grind beans and boil water without offending anyone's honor. You sit quietly and sip. It's thick, so thick it coats your tongue like syrup, with a bitterness that lingers at the back of your throat, and then melts, like some forgotten spice from a dream you haven't had yet. Across the table, an elderly scholar is tracing something in the grounds at the bottom of his cup. Divination? Maybe. Or maybe he's just bored. In Ottoman society, reading coffee grounds was both a pastime and a pseudo-science, especially among women, who weren't always welcome in kahvehanes, but made up their own rich rituals behind harem walls. Nearby, someone sneezes. A man in a long cloak mutters that it's the coffee dust. He always said they grind it too fine in this district. You nod politely, not that he notices. The kahvehane is equal parts performance and privacy. No one talks loudly. If they do, it's poetry. If someone's angry, it's discussed through metaphor. Unless you're dealing with a janissary on leave, in which case best to just finish your cup and find a quieter corner. There's no sugar here. Not yet. That won't arrive for another century or so. No milk either. The Ottomans took their coffee straight, thick and dark, brewed in small copper pots called ses, over embers or hot sand. The goal wasn't just taste, it was a texture, a tempo, a state of mind. You didn't gulp Ottoman coffee, you drifted through it, and before long you realized that the Kavahain is more than a place to sip and sit. It's a stage. Men posture here, alliances form here. Somewhere in the back, an official scribbles a coded message on parchment, pretending to write a love poem. A young man recites verses too loudly, clearly hoping a local bey's daughter is listening from the balcony above. Coffee has made its mark on this city, and on you. Already, you feel more awake than you meant to. But don't worry, it's early. You have many cups ahead, and maybe, just maybe, you'll discover why this bitter black drink became one of the Ottoman Empire's most intoxicating forms of control. You lean back. The call to prayer sounds again, lower now. A breeze slips through the wooden shutters. Somewhere behind the counter, the vendor grumbles about the price of charcoal and dreams of a better supplier in Galata. Your cup is empty, but the story, it's just getting started. The Kavahain is quieter now. The city's morning chaos fades into a soft hum, as if the whole empire exhales after its first cup. You shift on your cushion, adjusting the folds of your borrowed kaftan. A boy sweeps crumbs near the doorway, pausing only to yawn so dramatically it makes you yawn too. A perfect time to observe. The place isn't just a coffee house, it's a court in miniature. Ottoman society thrives on ritual, and nowhere is that more visible than here. You're in a public cafe, but this is far from casual. There are rules, invisible ones, but very real. First off, you notice how the seating works. Elders and scholars occupy the best-lit corners, backs to the wall, prime positioning for people watching in judgment. Merchants get the middle space, leaning over ink-stained ledgers, and newcomers like you hover near the entrance, where it's breezy and slightly less reputable. Then there's the staff, not waiters, but more like stewards of social etiquette. The main server, the kavashi, doesn't speak much. He glides between customers, pouring from his long-spouted ses with a grace that borders on theatrical. You get the feeling he could probably balance 5 of those pots on his head, and still not spill a drop. Historians still debate whether these coffee houses began as honest rest stops for tired traders, or if they were intentionally built as neutral zones, places where politics could happen quietly, without swords or scribes. Either way, the result is the same, a place where ideas ferment stronger than the brew. You glance up, someone's performing. A man with a curled mustache reads poetry aloud, not from a book, but from memory, divan poetry, the kind that compares eyebrows to swords and eyes to the sea. The crowd nods along, but only gently. Applause is uncouth. A well-timed eyebrow raise is enough, and while it all seems intellectual, you're quick to notice something else. Power lurks here, not in the overt way of palace guards or tax collectors, but in subtler shades. A word dropped at the wrong moment, a frown held too long. Even the pouring of a second cup can be loaded with meaning. Did you earn it, or is the server trying to overhear your conversation? You sip cautiously. Next to you, a low conversation is brewing. 2 men in turbans discussing tax rates on imported spices. One quotes a verse from the Quran, the other counters with a proverb. Neither one smiles. You realize this isn't chit-chat, it's negotiation, coded in metaphor. And somewhere in the back, an apprentice scribbles the conversation down. For fun? For espionage? Hard to tell. This is what Ottoman cafes were, not just caffeine-fueled escapes, but hubs of discourse. Decisions made here would ripple outward, into markets, marriages, and maybe even rebellion. In fact, some sultans feared these very places. They knew that when people gathered to talk, things happened, dangerous things. It's why, in more than one reign, coffee houses were shuttered or restricted, but they always came back, stronger, smarter, like dandelions sprouting between bricks. One traveler in the 17th century described Ottoman coffee houses as places where the lowest beggar could contradict the words of a pasha, an exaggeration perhaps, but not by much. In these dimly lit rooms, a servant could gain renown as a poet, a bookseller could quietly influence politics, and a janissary could recruit allies for the next incident. Even the furniture obeys the unwritten laws. Cushions are arranged not for comfort but for access. The best seats face both the door and the room. If you sit with your back to the entrance, you're either naive or too powerful to care. You shift your seat, just in case. There's a particular table in the far corner, low, worn and oddly prestigious. It's reserved for a man known simply as the listener. He doesn't talk, he doesn't drink, but he's always there. No one knows if he reports to the palace, the janissaries, or just writes bad novels under a pen name. Either way, people whisper around him, but not to him. You wonder if he notices you. Probably. You slouch anyway. Just then, the door creaks and a woman walks in. Now that's unusual. Ottoman kahvehanes were mostly male domains, but there were exceptions. Sometimes a high-ranking lady might visit with a veil and entourage, or a female poet would be invited for a reading. This one walks confidently, places a coin on the counter, and nods to the server like she owns the place. No one blinks. She gets her coffee in a tiny silver fincan, delicately engraved. You note the pattern, interlocking stars, possibly Andalusian. No saucer. That's significant. In these parts, saucers often denote status or specific serving traditions. There's even a rumor that the Sultan's advisor once dismissed an envoy because his cup lacked an appropriate saucer motif. True? Probably not, but it's too boring not to be possible. And that's the thing about Ottoman protocol. It's often more elaborate than necessary. But in the empire, etiquette is armor. You never know who's watching, or why. The woman takes her coffee and slips into the shadows. Someone whispers that she's from a family of calligraphers. Someone else claims she's a Sufi scholar. Both agree she makes better coffee than anyone here. You believe it. By now, you're halfway through your second cup. It doesn't get any sweeter, but your taste buds are adjusting. You notice hints of cardamom, maybe nutmeg. The Ottomans didn't add much, preferring purity over playfulness, but occasionally someone would sneak in cinnamon if they thought no one important was looking. As you swirl the grounds at the bottom, trying to imitate your elderly neighbor from earlier, you realize how little of this is accidental. The hierarchy, the rhythm, the choreography of serving and sipping, it's all a performance, one that's been playing since the 1550s. And the show, it never ends, at least, not until the coffee runs out. Your cushion's warming now. The kahvehane feels like home, or as close to it as you're going to get in an empire, where your bed may be straw, and your alarm clock is a rooster with boundary issues. You raise your cup to take another sip, only to realize it's gone. Again, you don't remember finishing it. That's how it works here. Coffee disappears, while thoughts drift. You glance around and spot something new, nervous energy, the kind that shifts seats and silences poetry. At the front of the room, a tall man in a green sash enters. He isn't smiling. He also isn't drinking. That's never a good sign. He's a class, mid-tier official, judging by the way people rise, not out of respect, but strategy. His shoes are polished. His beard is trimmed too neatly. And most importantly, he carries no cup. Someone whispers, "Is it happening again?" You don't know what it is. Not yet. The green-sashed man speaks quietly to the kaffachi, who nods, frowns, and then turns a full 180 degrees to face a wooden plaque behind the counter. You squint. A list of edicts, or warnings. One reads, "By order of the Sultan." No recitation of inflammatory poetry. No gambling. No debates about theology. No false beard-wearing. And above all, no coffee from unlicensed pots. That last line makes you blink. Coffee from unlicensed pots. Yes. Welcome to the Ottoman Empire's great caffeine contradiction. See, back in 1580, Sultan Murad III, son of the poetry-loving Selim II, decided that coffee was getting a little too popular, too stimulating, too dangerous. It wasn't about health really, it was about control. People were gathering in coffee houses, whispering ideas, questioning things. Some wore disguises, some spread rumors, some read banned books. Naturally, the state panicked and banned the drink, or tried to. Historians still argue whether the ban was ever enforced seriously. Some claim it was mostly symbolic, meant to scare merchants and make janissaries behave. Others swear Murad sent spies to break mugs and smash kettles. There's even a possibly embellished tale of a royal executioner lurking behind coffeehouse doors, waiting to arrest anyone mid-sip. You sip more quietly. But here's the thing, no one really stopped drinking. Instead they adapted. Merchants went underground, literally in some cases, digging out basement cafes and setting up systems with coded knocks. Coffee was served in inkpots, sesver hidden under carpets. It was prohibition, Ottoman style. And instead of gin in bathtubs, it was cardamom brew in candlelit closets. You're told there was a brief black market boom. Families in Galata allegedly dug tunnels between houses just to pass coffee hand to hand without getting caught. One story claims a man was caught roasting beans in a shoe. Another that a woman wore a hollowed-out book as a decoy brewing kit. Was all that true? Possibly. Ottoman records are dramatic when they want to be. And besides, the line between fiction and state propaganda was sometimes just a cup's width apart. Eventually, the ban relaxed. As with most things, money won. Taxes on legal coffee became too lucrative. Officials figured it was better to regulate the ritual than pretend it didn't exist. So, the Kaffeehaus reopened, officially. But the paranoia never quite left. You see it now in the way that green-sashed official eyes the corners, how the server pours just a bit more carefully, how poetry shifts back to nature instead of politics. Still, there are ways to rebel. One man in the corner taps his cup twice, then lifts it before finishing. You ask what that means. The server murmurs, "It's a joke." It means, "I support the rebellion, but only halfway." You're not sure if he's kidding. There's a saying etched in the wall behind you. 1 cup of coffee, 40 years of friendship. It's quaint, it's sweet, but it also hides an edge. Because Ottoman coffee wasn't just about waking up. It was about alliance, about loyalty. If someone handed you a cup, they were doing more than offering a beverage. They were staking their reputation. In fact, some sources suggest that during the brief bans, to offer someone coffee was seen as a test of trust. If they accepted, you both agreed to the risk. If they refused, you knew where their loyalty lay. Friendships ended over such exchanges. Marriages too. Speaking of which, someone slides beside you and offers a refill. You smile and nod. The cup warms your fingers again. You're learning the rhythm now. It's said that during Murad's ban, one of his own ministers was caught sipping a late-night brew in his private garden. When confronted, he allegedly replied, "The stars gave me permission." Naturally, he was promoted the next year. The ban eventually faded. Of course, people forget, empires evolve, but the memory lingered. That's why, even decades later, you see Kaffeehaus owners glance at the door every time it creaks, just in case. The official with the sash leaves. No one moves until the door shuts. Then, almost too quickly, the poetry starts again. Someone recites a line about pigeons and pistachio trees. Someone else laughs, maybe louder than they should. You sip once more. The bitterness now feels familiar, reassuring even. You swirl the cup, inspecting the sediment at the bottom. A shape forms, possibly a camel, or a cat, or a tiny angry sultan. You don't ask. Some mysteries are best left to coffee grounds. The coffee in your hand now is different. It's the same rich black syrup. But there's something about the aroma, something heavier, deeper. You hear whispers from the corner table. Mocha beans, fresh, arrived this week from Yemen. And suddenly your taste buds lean in, like they're eavesdropping. You're about to trace the beans' journey, not just a trek across deserts and borders, but a political dance, a whispering network of merchants, guards, mules, and the occasional deeply suspicious customs official with a sweet tooth. Because the Ottoman coffee supply? Oh, it's a whole operation. The most prized beans in the empire come from Yemen, specifically the highland region around the port of Mocha. Yes, like your favorite overpriced latte. The air is thin, the slopes steep, and the beans, small, dense, slow-growing miracles. The Ottomans consider them not just better, but holier. But Yemen is not around the corner. Getting those beans to Istanbul means moving them up dusty ridges, through camel convoys across the Arabian Peninsula, onto boats across the Red Sea, through Alexandria, then overland or up to Constantinople by ship. Every step has tolls. Every toll is a negotiation. You've joined the journey in disguise, of course, as a lowly assistant to a spice merchant named Hallam, who believes that wearing extra rings brings luck. Spoiler: it mostly brings attention. You quickly learn that the bean trade is not for the faint of heart. Caravans are attacked. Beans get stolen. One tale you hear, possibly exaggerated, involves a group of smugglers stuffing coffee sacks inside stuffed goats to get past tax checkpoints. Apparently, the guards were more interested in counting the legs than checking the stuffing. Historians still argue whether such stories were true or crafted to justify price hikes at port cities. What's not debated is that every nobleman's table in Istanbul had an unspoken pecking order based on coffee freshness. Serve last year's beans, and you'd find yourself excluded from dessert and possibly inheritance. By the time the beans reach the imperial kitchens, they've cost more than silk. They're sorted by hand, bad ones tossed, good ones roasted slowly over low coals. You're now watching one of the palace's inner courtyards, where a team of silent kitchen boys works in rhythmic unison. One grinds, another stirs, a third counts out pinches of cardamom like they're precious stones. And presiding over all of it, the Grand Vizier's personal coffee steward. This man, tiny, sharp-eyed, with a beard so geometrically trimmed it could serve as a ruler, is the gatekeeper of taste. He doesn't smile. He doesn't blink much either. He inspects every pot before it's served. And yes, he does reject cups. Publicly. It's theater, and it's terrifying. You learn that the Grand Vizier prefers his brew smooth, no foam, with precisely one dried clove floated like a ship in a dark sea. If the clove sinks, start over. If it floats too high, start over. If it tilts, you guessed it, start over. You begin to realize why coffee was more than a drink here. It was a measurement of refinement, of patience, of power. The Kahve Sibasha, the chief coffee maker of the palace, outranks many military officers. Why? Because he's always near the Sultan. Always. If anyone's going to slip something into a drink, it's probably him. So he must be beyond reproach, a master of subtlety, a shadow in embroidered robes. One popular rumor is that the Kahve Sibasha once stopped a coup by noticing that the rebels' coffee request included orange peel, something the Sultan loathed. He alerted the guards. The rebellion was over before the second pot brewed. That's probably embellished. But again, too boring not to be a little true. Back in the courtyard, you notice the smell change as the roast darkens. Beans pop gently, like polite applause. A golden tray is brought out, engraved with tulip patterns. A ceremonial cup is placed atop it. Steam curls. You lean closer, and then, it's taken away. Not for you, a guard mutters, smiling slightly. This is for him. Him is of course the Sultan. He won't drink alone. The Grand Vizier, a visiting ambassador, maybe the commander of the navy, all will join in a silent sipfest that contains more tension than most battlefields. Because one wrong cup can send a message. Did you pour too little? Disrespect. Too much. Mockery. Did you serve the coffee clockwise? Ah, diplomacy. Counterclockwise. You're clearly picking sides. One historical record recounts a visit from a Persian diplomat who, confused by Ottoman serving rituals, waited for the Sultan to drink first. But the Sultan, expecting the guest to sip first as a sign of peace, stared. And so they sat, silent, unmoving, for 47 minutes. Eventually someone coughed. A eunuch fainted. They both drank. War was narrowly avoided. You return to the Kahve Hain with a new respect for what's in your cup. Someone is roasting fresh beans in the back now, hand cranked over an open flame. The air smells like toasted walnut and incense. The Kavasi sees your look and nods. Yemeni. Arrived this week. Carried by fools, roasted by saints. You smile, because here, that makes sense. Your next cup is deeper, richer. You taste the journey in it, the miles, the bribes, the shaking carts, the sweat of donkey drivers, and the quiet breath held by every kitchen boy, waiting for the Kavasi to nod. You taste the empire in a sip. You don't mean to follow the servant, but you do. He's carrying a gleaming tray of coffee, the steam curling over its silver rim, like a tiny cloud above a tiny volcano. His footsteps are deliberate, measured, and for good reason. He's headed to the Topkapi Palace, through the Gate of Felicity, toward the inner court, which means that this coffee isn't just coffee, it's an audience, an offering, a message in liquid form. And you, just a few paces behind, are about to sneak into the world of the Kavasi Basha, the chief imperial coffee maker, arguably one of the most peculiar and quietly powerful roles in the entire Ottoman bureaucracy. It's not easy to get in, but no one questions someone walking purposefully while carrying parchment and looking confused. You bluff your way past a guard by muttering about bean inventories. He nods sympathetically. No one wants to deal with inventories. Now you're inside the heart of the Ottoman elite machine. Unlike the smoky kahvehanes of the city, this place is spotless, quiet. The gardens are overly trimmed. Birds chirp, but even they seem to do so on schedule. In the palace kitchens, the Kavasi Basha reigns supreme. He isn't flashy. In fact, you almost miss him. Just a tall, composed man in rich but sober robes, standing beside a silver coffee set so ornate, it looks like it was built to store moonlight. He doesn't speak, he observes. You're told the Kavasi Basha takes an oath when appointed, a secret oath. The contents aren't written down, oral only. Rumor has it the pledge includes never revealing palace gossip, never altering the coffee recipe without direct permission, and never under any circumstance spilling even a drop on the Sultan's kaftan. Historians still debate the extent of the Kavasi Basha's political reach. Some claim he was merely ceremonial, a glorified barista with nice handwriting. Others argue that because he had constant access to the Sultan, he became an unofficial advisor, someone who could whisper gentle suggestions over the rim of a warm cup. And if those suggestions came with a dash of cinnamon, who's to say that didn't help? He didn't act alone. The Kavasi Basha managed an entire sub-branch of palace staff, coffee boys, tray polishers, bean inspectors, all part of a silent engine running in the background of Ottoman politics. They didn't speak much, but they listened, and that made them dangerous. You witness the ceremony now. The brewing begins. He places the sedzvi, a small long-handled copper pot, into warm sand. Not fire, not coals, sand. This is the traditional method. The heat is gentle, surrounding the pot evenly. It bubbles slowly, reluctantly, like it's being asked to share secrets it doesn't trust you with yet. A servant grinds the beans using a mortar and pestle, not a mill. More control that way. Each bean crushed to a fine powder so even the water won't realize it's been infiltrated. Then comes the water, cold, pure, probably from a spring that has its own bureaucratic file somewhere. He adds a spoon of sugar, just one. The Sultan, today, prefers it adds securely, lightly sweetened. The sedzvi is removed just before it boils. Never let it boil. That would be barbaric. That would be French. A tiny porcelain cup is pre-warmed by cradling it in a silk cloth next to the fire. Then with a wrist flick so subtle it might qualify as sorcery, the Kavasi Basha pours. The foam rises, smooth, unbroken. It's perfect. This apparently is diplomacy. You follow the tray as it glides through polished halls. It is brought before the Sultan, not directly, of course. No one just hands him something. It is placed on a small table, then gently nudged forward by a eunuch, then acknowledged with a nod. No words, just steam. And here's where it gets interesting. The Grand Vizier is present, so is the Chief Mufti, and an ambassador from Hungary, who based on his expression, clearly prefers wine. They all receive cups, but the Sultan's is different, slightly larger, rimmed in gold. That detail matters. In Ottoman court culture, such things signal rank, cup size, handle design, even the tray material. One story says a rival court once served the Sultan coffee in a pewter cup instead of porcelain, causing 3 weeks of diplomatic sulking and one cancelled parade. The Sultan sips, just once. Everyone else waits. He places the cup down. No reaction. But the Kavisi Basha, watching from the shadows, nods. He's done his job. And tomorrow he'll do it again, probably with a different sugar ratio, depending on the Sultan's dreams. You learn that being Kavisi Basha isn't just about making good coffee. It's about timing, reading the room, knowing when to serve and when to wait, when to pause the pour mid-air for dramatic effect, when to place the cup just slightly to the left, if a right-hand sip might signal political alignment with the Janissaries. There are even rumors of coffee being used as a signal. If a second cup is served within a minute, it means the guest is being welcomed into an inner circle. If it's served lukewarm, a warning. You can't confirm these tales, but you watch a second cup delivered to the Hungarian ambassador. His eyes widen. He smiles. He bows too deeply. You suppose he got the message. As the trays are cleared and the men lean back into polite diplomacy, you notice something on the Kavisi Basha's tray. A small ring of gold, left under one of the cups. You blink. A bribe? A tip? Or maybe, just maybe, a quiet thank you. In a palace where words can be dangerous, maybe the most powerful messages are left in saucers. You exit quietly, feeling the hum of caffeine and protocol under your skin. You now know what it means to brew power, not just coffee, and you're only halfway through your day. You step back into the city, and the noise hits like a soft drum roll. Vendors calling, gulls circling overhead, the occasional splash of water from a passing fishmonger rinsing his cart too close to your shoes. But your mind is still in the palace, still echoing with the quiet gravity of the Kavisi Basha and the clink of porcelain diplomacy. Back in the Kavihani, your seat awaits, warm, familiar, slightly concave from all this leaning and listening. But before your cushions even settled, someone slides a cup in front of you. Dark, hot, thick. You nod in thanks and raise it. Another sip, another story. Because coffee in the Ottoman Empire isn't just a drink or a ritual, it's a test. You're about to find out just how literal that can be. A younger man nearby, a courier, judging by the dust on his boots, leans in and whispers, "Did you hear about the marriage trial?" You pause mid-sip. Marriage trial. He grins. They say a bride's coffee says everything. And just like that, you're pulled into another layer of the empire's caffeine-coated culture. This time, domestic diplomacy. In many Ottoman households, especially among the urban middle and upper classes, marriage proposals weren't sealed with roses or awkward poems. They were sealed, or shattered, over a single cup of coffee. The tradition: a suitor arrives with his family to the home of the woman he hopes to marry. They talk, they smile, but all eyes are on one thing: the cup she serves him. If it's perfectly brewed, just the right temperature, foam intact, and handed with a confident smile, it's a green light. But if it's cold, bitter, over-sweetened, or worst of all, salted instead of sugared, that's a very polite way of saying, "Hard pass, sir." Historians still argue about how widespread this practice was. Some believe it was more theatrical than actual. Others insist it held real weight, with saltier brews quietly saving dozens of girls from mismatched marriages. One account even tells of a young woman who stirred olive brine into the cup. The groom-to-be smiled anyway. He was accepted, apparently for both taste and tolerance. But coffee wasn't just for lovers. It was also for liars. You're told of a military officer who was interrogated, not under torture, but over coffee. He was invited for a friendly chat with his commanding officer, handed a cup, and questioned gently. The theory: a guilty man would either drink too fast to avoid talking, or too slow to delay answering. He drank quickly. He was quietly dismissed the next day. You glance at your own cup. You sip evenly. Ottoman culture didn't invent the coffee test, but it perfected it. Beyond weddings and war councils, coffee was woven into the fine print of daily life. It soothed arguments, settled land disputes. One documented case involved two brothers fighting over an inheritance who agreed to resolve everything with a shared coffee ceremony. They hired a neutral kavesi, set the sezv on the fire, and swore to accept whatever decision they reached before the ground settled. The younger brother got the farm, the older one got the goat. Neither spoke again for 12 years. Back in your kavihani, an elderly man leans over to explain another tradition, the third cup rule. If someone visits your home and you serve them a first cup, it's courtesy. A second cup, hospitality. A third, you're either inviting them to stay the night or tell you a secret. He winks. You raise an eyebrow. He chuckles and goes back to his paper. At a nearby table, two women are debating cardamom, whether it belongs in coffee or is an abomination. One says yes, the other says only in winter. You don't weigh in. You're learning. Then comes another oddity. A janissary arrives. Broad shoulders, leather boots, the unmistakable creak of someone who walks like the city belongs to him. He removes his sword before entering. Tradition. Everyone watches but casually. He orders coffee and waits. The server brings it. They lock eyes. And then, this part you nearly miss. He lifts the cup and turns it slightly counterclockwise before sipping. It's a signal, one that says in certain janissary circles, I am listening, but not agreeing. Another man across the room sees it, mirrors it. No words, just coffee, tilting slightly against the empire. You remember the old rumor that the janissary revolts of the 17th century began not with drums or manifestos, but with a series of quiet coffeehouse meetings, and cups tilted just so. Coffee in the Ottoman world could be playful, romantic, diplomatic, but also deadly serious. It was said that the difference between a blessing and a threat could lie in how the cup was placed on the saucer. Upright, gratitude; upside down, defiance; sideways, a pending negotiation. Your cup now is empty again. The server brings another. No words, just steam. And in that moment, you begin to see the layers, not just of grounds in the bottom, but of meaning. This isn't a drink. It's a language, one you're slowly becoming fluent in. A young couple arrives and takes a seat across from you. She pours. He smiles. She waits. You watch him taste. He winces. She grins. You don't know what just happened, but you suspect it was a full conversation. The coffee keeps coming. At this point, you're not sure if you're awake, half dreaming, or slowly becoming part of the cushion you've nested into. Your fingers are permanently curled around a porcelain cup. Your body feels lighter, but your ears sharper than ever. Because what you're hearing now is porcelain politics. You've drifted into a different corner of the Kavahane. This one's quieter, shaded by a heavy curtain that barely flutters despite the breeze. The table is marble. The conversation hushed, slow, deliberate. The kind where every sentence hides a second meaning, and every sip is a potential statement. The men seated here are no ordinary drinkers. Their robes are too fine, their shoes too clean, and the cups in front of them, not the usual coarse ceramics. These are translucent, paper-thin, impossibly delicate. They don't clink, they whisper. You've wandered into the world of Ottoman elite etiquette, where the shape of a saucer might tip a political alliance, and an accidental spill might get someone reassigned to a post near Siberia. The first thing you notice is how still everyone is. Hands hover over their cups. A few fingers rest lightly on the rim, as if cupping a fragile opinion, and no one drinks until someone else does first. It's a standoff in espresso form. Historians still debate the exact rules that govern these upper-crust coffee encounters. Some say there were official codes passed down from sultan to vizier. Others argue it was all learned through careful mimicry and hushed warnings from servants who'd seen one too many minor nobles, publicly embarrassed over how they held a spoon. You lean closer. The conversation flows like molasses, thick, slow, and far more potent than it appears. One man mentions the Pasha of Damascus with what seems like admiration, but then compares his strategy to that of a lukewarm pour. Everyone around the table stiffens ever so slightly. Translation: the pasha is competent, but uninspired, like coffee that doesn't quite boil. Moments later, another man refers to the Grand Vizier's son as a fine porcelain cup, with a crack no one wants to admit is growing. Subtle, brutal, beautiful. You sip, now fully aware that the shape, thickness, and color of your cup say more about you than any title ever could. Here, cup design is a dialect. There are wide-brimmed ones, popular with military officials, said to cool the brew quickly, like their tempers or lack thereof. There are tulip-shaped cups, preferred by poets and musicians. And then there are the elite flat-bottomed, narrow-mouthed cups, used almost exclusively in state gatherings. These trap heat and aroma, intense, unforgiving, just like court politics. You glance at yours: modest curve, unadorned rim, safe, humble, neutral, excellent choice. A man 2 seats down shifts his cup to the right, before setting it down, a signal. In some circles, this is known to mean your message has been received but not accepted. A mild social slap, cushioned in porcelain. The recipient of the gesture raises his cup in a slow theatrical toast. Another signal, possibly: I respect your opinion, but you're very wrong, and possibly smell faintly of donkey. No one smiles, but you hear it loud and clear. You're told of a legendary faux pas at the wedding of an Ottoman governor's daughter. The groom's family arrived with their own set of coffee cups, imported, heavy, gaudy. The bride's family offered their usual set, refined, minimalist, imperial approved. A server, flustered, mixed them on the tray. Someone drank from the wrong cup. The room went quiet. 2 uncles left. 1 pomegranate tree was uprooted in protest. The marriage lasted 11 months. And that's how you learn in high society, Ottoman circles, what you drink isn't as dangerous as how you drink it. Another story floats your way. This one about a famed calligrapher whose porcelain cup bore a tiny crack. He insisted on keeping it. When questioned, he said, "A cup that hides its flaw teaches humility." The Sultan heard of it, and made him imperial calligrapher the next week. Now every scholar wants a cracked cup. Fashion is strange like that. You stretch, just slightly, and accidentally knock your spoon. It clinks. Everyone looks, just for a breath, then returns to their cups. But you feel the shift. You've been noticed. You do what any sensible Ottoman caffeine diplomat would: raise your cup, slowly, humbly, and sip in silence. The moment passes, crisis averted. You're starting to understand the full performance now, the theater of hands, glances, sips, and saucers. It's a ballet with no music, a negotiation with no signatures, and yet reputations are made and unmade here. One merchant, older, sharp-eyed, and dressed in layered silks, leans toward his younger companion. He tells him a story, loud enough for you to catch. There was a time, he begins, when a man who wished to insult another wouldn't draw his sword. He'd simply serve his coffee in a chipped cup, and forget the saucer. The younger man gasps. You stifle a laugh, but it lingers. You look again at your own cup, still warm, still smooth, still somehow filled with both comfort and tension. And now, as you lift it once more, you understand. You're not just drinking history. You're holding diplomacy, etiquette, gossip, and reputation in a single fragile sip.
You don't mean to eavesdrop, not really. But when 2 men behind you lower their voices and begin a sentence with, "Did you hear what happened at the wedding?" you lean in before your conscience has time to object. The words come in fragments, like whispers drifting across a breeze-swept lake. A cup slipped, right in front of the Valide Sultan. Foam everywhere on the velvet, and she stared at him, I swear, like he'd insulted her ancestors. And now his cousin's posted to Aleppo. You sit back, eyes wide. You know the ritual of coffee runs deep in the empire, but you hadn't realized just how deep enough that a spill could become a scandal. Or worse. This is the story of how spilled beans can ripple through bloodlines. Today's cup, served with a honey-dipped fig and a walnut so bitter it must be medicinal, arrives just in time. The vendor gives you a look that says,
You'll want to hear this one. And he's right. Because now we're diving into the gossipy, absurd, and occasionally explosive world of Ottoman coffee mishaps, where foam becomes feud, and etiquette errors haunt entire branches of nobility. The wedding in question, a grand affair. Daughter of a provincial governor, married into the extended family of a high-ranking naval official. 2 sets of customs, 2 trays of conflicting tradition, and 1 poor servant caught in the middle, hands trembling as he offered the groom's mother her coffee. And then disaster. A drop, a tilt. The porcelain slipped, bounced once off the brass tray, and landed, miraculously upright, on the hem of her ceremonial gown. The silence was volcanic. In most parts of the world, this might have been brushed off. A clumsy moment, a chuckle, maybe a servant reassigned to kitchen duty. But here, the gown was velvet, embroidered, a gift from the Sultan's own tailor. The stain, like a black eye on the honor of 2 families. Some say she gasped, some say she didn't blink. One version insists she sipped her replacement cup without wiping the stain, which in court code means, this offense will not be forgotten, ever. Historians still argue whether this single incident triggered a years-long series of passive-aggressive maneuvers between the families, dowry disputes, missed invitations, suspiciously overcooked baklava. But what's certain is this. From that day forward, both clans began using separate trays at every family event. The lesson? In Ottoman coffee protocol, spills weren't accidents, they were statements, or so everyone assumed. You're told of another case, a modest provincial dinner, where a visiting official accidentally bumped his elbow and sent a cup flying onto a rival's prayer mat. The stain was never cleaned. 2 years later, that rival's promotion was mysteriously denied. Coincidence? No one believes in those here. One poet even wrote, "A drop of kawa on brocade divides brothers more than blades." You sip carefully. Even in everyday kava hanes, etiquette is paramount. You hear of a time when a young man reached for his friend's cup by mistake, just a few fingers width off course. The friend didn't say a word. He simply stood, adjusted his sash and left. They didn't speak again for months. You start to wonder, is everyone watching your hands this closely? You adjust your cup carefully. Spills weren't always punishable, of course. Some were so absurd, they entered legend. One tale speaks of a vizier who, nervous before meeting a foreign envoy, accidentally knocked over the entire tray. The foreigner, startled, leapt up, and in doing so knocked over his own tray. A brief moment of mutual embarrassment turned into laughter. A new treaty was signed the next day. It's still known in some circles as the Treaty of Twin Spills, but such outcomes are rare. Usually, a coffee spill is the social equivalent of dropping a sword on someone's toe, especially during ceremonies, especially with witnesses, especially if the foam was good. Because that's another part of the tension. Foam. Ottoman coffee was judged not just on taste, but on the crown of creamy bubbles that topped the cup. A perfect foam, culinary nobility. No foam, failure. And if that precious foam hits the floor, you might as well have dropped your family tree. In fact, there were phrases for it. He let the foam fall, a metaphor for missed opportunity. The grounds rose too fast, suggesting someone revealed their intentions too soon. She served cold foam, implying lukewarm affection or dishonesty in a romantic setting. You marvel at how an entire emotional language emerged from the color, heat, and texture of this one drink. At your kava hane, the server brings a rag and begins polishing a tray with reverence, like it's a relic. He tells you about his old mentor, a man who claimed he could judge someone's social rank, honesty and romantic prospects from how they lifted their cup. One woman, he said, lifted hers too cautiously. She fears being seen. Another man drank before anyone else. He is impatient but brave. A third tipped his foam into the saucer, then drank. This one plays a different game. It all sounds ridiculous, and yet, it fits. Because in a world where a spilled drop of coffee can mark the end of a friendship, you begin to understand the logic. If everything matters, then everything means something. So you sip again, slowly, with your back straight, and your wrist just slightly arched. You catch the eye of the man polishing the tray. He smiles. No foam escapes the rim.
You hear it before you see it. A soft scratch of quill on parchment. A faint crackle of roasted beans in the brazier. And then, whispers. Not gossip. Not poetry. Something quieter, sharper, strategic. This isn't the usual hum of a kavahan. It's something else entirely. You've found yourself in one of the empire's more discreet cafes. Not fancy, not flashy. A bit too plain, really. The kind of place you'd walk past if you weren't paying attention, which is exactly the point. The floor is swept. The cups are plain. But the customers, well, that's another story. Janissaries, off-duty, sit hunched in corners. Their uniforms are gone, but their boots are polished, and their backs are still too straight. At the back, two men in merchant robes speak a dialect you can't quite place, maybe Albanian, maybe coded. A boy comes and goes with notes folded, unread. This isn't just a coffee house. It's a listening post, a meeting room, a whispering wall with chairs. Welcome to the smoky world of coffeehouse espionage. The Ottomans didn't invent the idea of politics over coffee, but they perfected it. In places like this, revolts were seeded, ideas passed like sugar, and poems carried meanings that could get you promoted, or disappeared. And in the center of it all, the meta. At first glance, he seems harmless. Just an old storyteller, sitting near the hearth, a cup by his side, one eye cloudy with age. But when he begins to speak, everyone leans in, even the Janissaries. He's telling a tale about a fox who steals a baker's apron, but you start to realize, it's not about a fox and the apron. Probably not an apron. Historians still debate whether these stories were actually coordinated political code, or just heavily spiced metaphors, but the effect is real. People hear what they want to hear, and when the empire is watching from every minaret, sometimes it's safer to hide your politics in a parable. A young man beside you jots something in a ledger. He isn't tallying sales, he's listening, counting laughs, measuring pauses. When the storyteller says the fox wasn't as sly as he thought, three people nod in unison. One scribbles a name in the margin. This is how revolutions start, or at least how their shadows form. The Ottomans were well aware. That's why many sultans had coffeehouses shut down, or at least infiltrated. The most famous crackdown came during the reign of Sultan Murad IV, who, according to some accounts, would patrol the streets in disguise and personally execute anyone caught sipping. A bit dramatic, maybe, but fear is effective seasoning. And yet, despite every ban, every raid, the kavahanis survived, flourished even. Because coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a binding agent, a social glue. A cup shared meant a bond made, and a bond meant strength. And that, well, that made the empire nervous. You sip more carefully now. The Janissaries, for their part, were known to frequent these places, especially the less regulated ones. These elite soldiers, loyal only to the Sultan, were also a political force unto themselves. Over the centuries, they led coups, toppled viziers, and occasionally installed new sultans, like a barista swap says, and often, the first warning. A new group of Janissaries, suddenly regulars at a particular coffeehouse, talking less, listening more, changing the subject when others approached. Here, coffee is camouflage. You notice something odd. Several patrons in this room are drinking decaffeinated chicory blends, not because they prefer the taste, they absolutely don't, but because in a space where real coffee was taxed, rationed and watched, the fake stuff drew less attention. One old man, noticing your curiosity, mutters, "Real beans for real plans, chicory for watching eyes." Then he looks back down and sips his muddy cup. There's a worn volume resting near your cushion, an old book of Hafiz's poetry, but tucked inside is a newer slip of paper, a few lines, folded just so. Someone's left it there deliberately. You don't read it, that would be foolish, but someone else does. A man in his 30s picks it up,
scans it with the bored gaze of someone too practiced to be new at this, and tucks it under his sleeve. He sips, he leaves. No one speaks. You begin to realize how much happens around the coffee here. It's not just in the drinking, it's in the delay, the pause before you lift the cup, the silence between sips, the moment where two men stare at the steam rising and decide, without words, to trust each other, or not. There's even a phrase whispered by informants. The cup trembled. It means someone hesitated before answering, said too little, or too much. You reach for your own cup, hold it steady. You've learned now. Here a trembling hand says more than a shouted speech. The meta finishes his story. Everyone claps, lightly. Someone drops a coin in his bowl. He nods. You're sure he just told 5 different stories to 5 different people in the same hour. Not bad for a man with only one working eye. As the kava haning clears, you linger. One of the janissaries rises to leave but turns just before exiting. He adjusts the sezv on a nearby table, turning the handle 90 degrees. You've seen that signal before, back at the palace. It means we move tomorrow. You suddenly don't feel sleepy anymore, but you do feel ready for another cup.
The kava hane is quieter now. Its corners no longer humming with strategy or satire. But even in the lull, there's movement, a different rhythm, softer, slower. You follow it with your eyes, and notice the women. Not just passing by. They're here. One in a pale lavender scarf sets a cup down on her husband's tray, not beside it, but on it. You've learned enough by now to know that means something. Another, a little older, is seated cross-legged by the window, slowly grinding beans in a hand mill. Her movements are practiced, precise. You can tell this isn't her first sezvi. And in the back, 3 women sit with cups half drunk, talking so softly that even the smoke from their lamp seems hesitant to hover too close. You're about to witness the often overlooked half of the empire's coffee story, the gender of brewing, where women not only drank, but shaped, guarded, and sometimes weaponized the art of coffee. Contrary to the image of Ottoman coffeehouses as male-only realms, which to be fair they mostly were, women had a powerful coffee culture all their own, one that brewed quietly behind latticed windows, within the harem walls, and inside modest courtyards that held stories most historians never bothered to write down. You sip, slower now, because when women brewed in the Ottoman world, it wasn't idle, it was intentional. In households, the woman of the home was the master of the sezvi. Her brewing skills were her signature. A poorly brewed cup could embarrass her family. A perfectly executed one, a form of social capital. You're told of a girl in Edirne, whose coffee was so admired, she received 3 marriage offers before anyone had even met her. The story goes that her foam rose so high it touched the spoon without breaking. Her father said, "That's not a cup, that's a miracle." But beyond courtship, coffee was used for everything from calming family disputes to marking the end of mourning. In some households, women would refuse to serve coffee for 40 days after a death, a silent signal of grief and respect. And yes, there were consequences for disrespecting the ritual. One famous story tells of a woman who served bitter burned coffee to her brother-in-law after he insulted her embroidery. He took it as a joke. She never brewed for him again. Neither did any woman in the family. By the time he married, his bride was warned, never mention cardamom around her. But it wasn't all passive protest. Coffee was also a tool of legal and emotional power. You're handed a fresh cup, and the man who serves it chuckles. Do you know about the divorce clause? You don't. He leans in. In certain regions of the empire, especially in the urban centers, women could include a condition in their marriage contract that guaranteed their right to divorce if their husband failed to provide her with regular coffee. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was, or if it was just a poetic twist on broader issues of neglect. But there are records, real court documents, where judges ruled in favor of women who claimed their husbands were inconsistent in their duties of provision, coffee included. A lawyer might call that breach of contract. A barista might call it grounds for separation. In any case,
The cultural weight of that clause reveals how integral coffee was to a woman's life. It wasn't a luxury, it was a symbol of stability, of care, of a home. You look again at the women across the room. They're not just guests, they're anchors. The brewing they do isn't just culinary, it's emotional infrastructure. In the imperial harem, coffee had its own hierarchy. There were servants trained specifically to serve it to the Valide Sultan, and others whose sole duty was preparing coffee for the favored concubines. Mistakes were rare and costly. One tale tells of a girl who forgot to sweeten a cup. Her punishment, not banishment, but demotion from brewing for the Sultan's aunt to brewing for the sixth wife's cousin. In that world, it was the difference between velvet cushions and straw mats. And yet, despite the strict structure, women found subtle agency in their coffee rituals. Notes slipped under cups, conversations only possible with the excuse of brewing. The sound of a hand mill turning late into the night meant a heart still awake, still thinking, still plotting. One anecdote from the 18th century tells of a group of women in Bursa who organized a protest against rising coffee prices, not through shouting, but by refusing to brew. For a week, households across the district went coffee dry. Husbands complained, markets panicked, prices dropped. The protest ended, coffee returned. Foam never tasted sweeter. Even in the present coffee hain, you notice the difference. The coffee served by the woman near the window carries a different touch, less bitter, subtly floral. She adds rosewater. Not much, just a hint. It lingers. You're reminded that brewing is not just science, it's story. Every choice, how much heat, when to stir, whether to skim the foam, carries a quiet message. And in a world where women's voices weren't always recorded, coffee became a kind of language they could still speak fluently, even defiantly. You finish your cup. The woman catches your eye. She nods, approving your posture, your timing, the fact that you didn't gulp. You've passed something. You're not sure what, but you feel it. Another cup arrives. From another hand, you thank her with your eyes. In Ottoman coffee culture, that's more than enough.
By now, your heartbeat seems to match the rhythm of the kavahain. Slow, steady, somewhere between the bubbling of a seize and the creak of a low wooden chair. You're warm from the inside out. But just when you think you've reached peak serenity, someone at the next table drops a phrase that feels strangely modern. Did he pay tax on those beans? Everyone laughs, lightly, but not without meaning. Because you're about to learn something else about this magical drink. Coffee wasn't just culture, it was currency. And wherever there's currency, there's someone trying to avoid the ledger. This is the Bean Counters chapter. And it starts, like most Ottoman problems, with success. You see, coffee became so wildly popular, so completely embedded in everyday Ottoman life, that the government took one long, loving look at it and thought, that looks taxable. Enter the bean tax. On paper it was straightforward. Merchants importing or roasting coffee were to pay a small fee per unit. Roasters and sellers were expected to keep ledgers. Inspectors, in turn, were to audit them randomly. Easy, clean, profitable. In practice, a beautiful mess of secret compartments, fake ledgers, and more gifts to tax collectors than you'd believe could fit inside a seize. You hear a tale from the man polishing spoons at the corner of the kavahain. He tells it between flourishes, like a story he's told 100 times but still enjoys. There was a cafe in Galata, he says, where the owner kept 3 ledgers, one for the customers, one for the inspectors, and one for himself. In 1 month, he sold twice as much coffee as he reported, and hosted 2 visiting poets, a chess tournament, and a secret wedding. His punishment, a small fine. His fame, eternal. You learn that black market beans became a shadow industry of their own. Entire supply chains emerged that bypassed official checkpoints. Beans were smuggled in with barrels of olive oil, tucked beneath fish crates, and famously, hidden in decorative pillows carried by ladies of the court. Historians still argue whether the empire's loss of coffee revenue in the 17th century exceeded what it spent on 2 minor wars. But what's certain is this: every cup poured without a stamp was a small act of rebellion.
There were clever tricks too. Some cavahanes offered membership perks. Patrons could pay a flat weekly rate for reading space and ambiance, with a free cup of coffee provided by a friend. Legally, very gray, but enforceable. Not unless you had very nosy neighbors. One archive record mentions a group of bean smugglers using trained parrots to squawk warning calls when tax officials approached the docks. Another details a baker in Izmir who mixed coffee grounds into his bread dough, not for flavor, but to mask the volume of beans he was really moving. At one point, the empire created a special title for inspectors tasked with catching illicit coffee trade, Kave, Nizam Memurlara, coffee regulation officers. But most of them were either bribed, befriended, or baffled. You're told of a particular inspector who was gifted a pet goat named after the Grand Vizier. He never filed another report. But not everyone got away clean. A legend lingers about a merchant who roasted beans in a back alley without a permit. The smell wafted through the street, too rich, too pure. A passing nobleman sniffed, followed the trail, and discovered the operation. The merchant claimed it was medicinal. The nobleman said, "Then cure me," and sat down. That was the beginning of what became Istanbul's most famous underground kavahane. Even now your own server winks when asked about bean sourcing. Some come from Yemen, he says. Some come from friends. You don't press. The tax issue extended beyond importers. Even household consumption was watched. In some cities, a family buying too much coffee could be questioned. Were they hoarding, reselling, planning to host a poetry night with unregistered beans? A record from Bursa lists a fine issued to a man whose mother-in-law brewed coffee 3 times a day. The court's official position, this quantity, exceeds standard domestic need. You wonder what happened to her. You suspect she kept brewing anyway. And then there were the tax dodgers who became heroes. A woman known only as Fatma of the Fincan once roasted and sold coffee for 10 years without a single official license. Her cafe became a haven for artists and exiles. When she was finally caught, a dozen witnesses swore under oath that she only served hot spiced water. "No coffee here," they said, sipping cups that reeked of cardamom and dreams. The judge let her go. You sip again. And now, with each taste, you imagine more than just flavor. You imagine the risk, the quiet defiance, the click of a hidden ledger beneath the counter. Because this wasn't just about avoiding fees. This was about independence, about autonomy in a cup, a chance to own a small piece of power even if it came with fines, suspicion, or the occasional goat-shaped bribe. You set your cup down gently. No saucer this time, just you and the table. And for a moment you think you hear the soft rustle of a tax inspector's footsteps. Then the breeze returns, and the bean smoke swirls on.
The wind smells different now. You're near Galata now, the city's mouth to the world, and today's coffee comes with a side of wind, waves, and a question that's followed the Ottomans across oceans. What happens when your best brew leaves home? The Ottoman Empire didn't invent coffee, but it took the bean, cradled it, polished its rituals, and then perhaps accidentally sent it rippling outward into the waiting arms and eventually twitching fingers of Europe. You're sipping a Yemeni roast on a wooden bench outside a dockside cafe. Next to you a sailor argues with a spice merchant about cinnamon pricing. Behind you someone's roasting beans over coals balanced precariously on a barrel. The aroma is hypnotic and entirely familiar. But once, just once, an Italian diplomat who visited this very harbor took a few sacks of beans back to Venice. That, they say, changed everything. It started as a curiosity, a bitter black drink brought from the East. Too strong, too dark, too scandalously addictive. The Venetians called it Vino Nero, black wine. But before long their palates adjusted. Roasting methods were softened, sugar introduced, and milk, yes milk,
was added in ways that would make an Ottoman kafechibasha cry into his sezvi, and from Venice the bean spread to Marseille to Vienna to London. Each port twisted it a little further from its origin, but at every stop it carried a whisper of the empire it came from. You hear a sailor now telling a tale that's almost certainly exaggerated, that the first coffee-house in England was opened by a former janissary turned rogue trader. He says the man wore robes for flair, served his coffee with dates, and once slapped a duke for asking if it came in vanilla. Historians still debate whether this story is remotely true, but we do know that Ottoman beans were the backbone of Europe's earliest cafes. For decades, mocha beans shipped through Ottoman-controlled ports were the gold standard. Anything else was imitation. And how did they get there? Not always legally. You hear another tale whispered over a cup that's suspiciously good for a port cafe. It's about a man named Yusuf the Courteous, an Ottoman merchant who disguised his bean shipments as textiles and quietly built a trade route into Livorno. One day a crate burst open, beans rolled out like marbles. A local cook tried roasting them and burned down a bakery, but the next attempt, magic. From then on Livorno was hooked. You sip your own cup imagining what it would be like to be the first person in a country to taste this, to feel the heat, the bitterness, the strange energy of something so foreign it rewired your morning. No wonder Europe fell hard, but there was more than taste at stake. Politics brewed under the surface. Some in the Ottoman court worried. If Europeans learned the bean's secrets, what else might they claim? Power, ritual, the entire culture around it. There are even accounts, possibly exaggerated, of merchants being forbidden from selling whole beans to certain foreigners. Only ground beans. Let them drink but not plant, one vizier reportedly said. That didn't work for long. Eventually green beans were smuggled out by monks, diplomats, and more than one entrepreneurial gardener. Coffee trees soon rooted in Sri Lanka, Java, and Brazil. The bean was no longer Ottoman, but the style, the vibe, that lingered. In Parisian cafes, waiters mimicked the Ottoman style of service: small trays, low cups, quiet deference. In Vienna, coffee was paired with pastries in imitation of Ottoman hospitality. And even in England, land of tea and understatement, coffee houses borrowed the Ottoman tradition of being equal parts social salon and gossip exchange. You hear another sailor now, reading a letter aloud. It's from his cousin in Amsterdam, raving about a Turkish-style cafe with velvet chairs, long spoons, and tiny porcelain cups. He writes, "It's bitter and strange, and I love it." So here you are, sitting near the harbor where it all began, where the first beans left home, hidden under cloth or tucked into diplomatic luggage, destined to fuel revolutions, philosophy, and long nights in smoky drawing rooms. Back then, the bean's journey was literal. Today, it's symbolic. The Ottomans didn't hold on to the bean forever, but what they gave the world, ritual, rhythm, pause between sips, still lingers in every good cup. You finish yours and look down at the empty porcelain bowl. A shape in the grounds catches your eye. It looks like a ship, or maybe a spoon, or maybe just the echo of a centuries-old journey that still moves through every cafe, every kitchen, every early morning. You brush the rim gently, as if to say thank you, then let the ground settle.
The city is quieter now, not in the way a street falls silent after sunset, but in the way a breath holds just a second longer before being released. The kind of stillness that sits on your shoulders rather than your ears. You've left the harbor behind, wandered through narrow alleys where lamps flicker like thoughtful eyes, and arrived at a part of the city older than even its bricks admit. Here, tucked beside a crumbling madrasa and a fig tree that refuses to die, is a gathering not marked by signs or awnings, just soft chanting, a glow of candlelight, and the unmistakable scent of roasted coffee, laced with cardamom and clove. You've found the Sufis, mystics of the empire, and their coffee. It's a doorway, not just into alertness, but into presence. You remove your shoes, duck through a low archway, and enter a room that hums, not with conversation, but vibration, gentle, rhythmic recitation, not loud,
Not showy, but consistent. A tide of syllables flowing across a sea of stillness. Someone hands you a cup, without a word. You drink. It's hot, strong, thick as honey, and almost immediately, it wraps around your senses, not with jittery energy, but with warmth, with clarity, the kind of feeling that says stay a while. You're not finished yet. You are not in a kavahane. You are in a teke, a Sufi lodge, and here coffee is not performance, it's preparation, a spiritual fuel brewed for nights of chanting, spinning, meditation, and deep slow listening. Historians still argue how central coffee was to Sufi rituals. Some claim it was incidental, just a social accompaniment to long gatherings. Others insist it was foundational, a spiritual catalyst that allowed practitioners to stay awake through the zikr, the repetitive invocation of divine names meant to empty the self and open the heart. Either way, one fact remains: Sufis drank, often, with purpose. A sheikh in white robes explains as much between sips. We do not drink coffee to escape sleep, he says. We drink so we can see what dreams try to hide. Another man, barefoot, his beard a constellation of gray, nods and adds, the Prophet never forbade it. So long as the cup is clean and the intention is pure, it is permitted, even welcome. And in this dim-lit room, where calligraphy curls across the walls like smoke, coffee becomes something else entirely, not just a stimulant, but a sacrament. You watch as a group of men sit cross-legged around a low table. One begins to chant, another joins, a third taps a rhythm into a small drum, a fourth pours more coffee into small copper cups, sliding them along the floor in practiced movements. Each sip aligns with breath, each breath with a word, each word with intention, and slowly, without quite realizing, you feel yourself drawn into it. Not the chant itself, but the rhythm of it, the way the sound doesn't demand attention, but invites it. You close your eyes, just for a moment. The Sufis believed that presence, true presence, was one of the most sacred states a human could attain. And in the flickering candlelight, you begin to understand why. Because here the coffee isn't for chatter, it isn't for politics, or flirtation, or strategy. It's for silence that isn't empty. The sheikh speaks again softly. In the cup we see the self, black, hot, bitter, but then sweetened, gently with reflection. You raise your cup, mimic his motion, and for a moment you see what he means. The surface of your brew reflects the low flame beside you, a single shimmer, a single point of light. A Sufi beside you shares a tale, his voice so soft the words seem to arrive directly in your thoughts. He tells of a mystic named Husain, who refused to drink coffee if he was angry. He believed that emotion changed the taste of the water, that heat drawn from fire carried memory, that a sesvi held more than beans, it held intention. No one ever saw him boil water without reciting a prayer. It's hard to know if the story is literal, but it feels possible, because tonight in this room, surrounded by slow movements and slower voices, you realize that coffee here is more than preparation, it's transformation. It brings the Sufi into wakefulness, but not agitation, alertness, but not haste. It lets them sit through hours of chanting, of stillness, of slow inner excavation, and the drink itself, served hot but not scalding, always in small sips, never with distraction. The baraka, the blessing, is in the discipline. As the night deepens, a few men begin to spin, slowly, one hand to the sky, the other to the earth. Their eyes are open but unfocused. Their lips continue the chant. They move like leaves caught in wind that has somewhere holy to be. You're told not all lodges practiced this form of the sema, or whirling prayer, but where they did, coffee played a small role, drank before, never during, a means of centering, never a crutch. The room seems warmer now, not from heat, but from presence, from people who have nowhere else to be. You're invited to stay longer. You do, not out of obligation, but because there is nowhere more peaceful. Your last cup tonight is brewed over embers. The sheikh prepares it slowly, no rush, no flourish, just care. He hands it to you with both hands. You accept it the same way. You don't speak, but you understand. In the stillness, in the swirl of chant and steam, in the hands that pass cups without command, you find something you weren't looking for, not answers, but permission to rest.
Morning in Istanbul begins not with the sun, but with shouting, vendors, seagulls, the clang of pans from rooftop kitchens, the squeak of carts crossing uneven stones. The empire is waking up, and it's grumpy. You're walking through a square still shadowed by minarets. When the first ripple of tension hits the air, a merchant slams his hand on a counter. A customer raises his voice. A child runs past you with a bundle of newspapers, all of them damp and unread. Something is wrong. And you, unlucky wanderer of coffee-scented time, are about to witness a rare beast, an Ottoman coffee riot. It doesn't begin all at once. These things never do. Like coffee, riots must be brewed. It starts with price. A cup that once cost 3 para is now 4.5. Not much, you think. Barely a bite of bread. But in a city where a laborer's daily wage can vanish into one round of coffee for his friends, that half para is a slap in the foam. Historians still debate what sparked this particular outburst. Some blame a drought in Yemen. Others cite greedy merchants, corrupt tax officers, or the sudden disappearance of a beloved coffee, whose sesvi was said to brew the smoothest surface in the district. But whatever the trigger, the spark catches. You're sipping near the spice market, when a man shouts, "Where's the foam, Mehmet? I paid for foam." The reply comes quick. You paid for gossip and heat. Be glad it's not water. And just like that, words escalate. A chair tips, a cup shatters, steam rises, and so do tempers. Before long, what begins as petty insult turns into something else entirely. A marketplace chorus of grievances long stewed. One man bellows about bean weight fraud. Another complains of boiled grounds, a cardinal sin. A woman waves a cup and demands a refund from the governor himself. "Let him drink this and say it's fair," she cries, and the crowd agrees. There's no script, but everyone knows their lines. Coffee owners close shutters. Porters grab sticks. Bakers toss day-old bread at anyone who looks official. Even the pigeons seem to scatter with unusual purpose. You duck behind a stack of baskets and hear a chant forming. Real beans, real price. It's ridiculous, and somehow sincere. A man near you explains that this isn't the first time. There have been others, small uprisings, usually short-lived, but they always end the same way. Someone gets trampled, someone else gets promoted, and everyone remembers the price of beans for the next 5 years. And yet this time feels different. Why? Because the crowd is mixed. Sailors, bakers, poets, mothers, one old man waving a broken spoon like it's a scepter. The kind of unrest that says, this isn't about coffee anymore. But also somehow it still is. You're reminded of a phrase a scholar once muttered in a quieter coffee hane. The empire doesn't fear swords, it fears cups. And now you see why. Coffee is where people gather, where they talk, where they notice together that things aren't quite right, that a flavor is off, that a tax is too high, that someone's been promoted who shouldn't have been, that someone else vanished without a letter. Coffee is the conduit. And today it's the match. The governor sends guards, of course. Not many. Just enough to show that he's paying attention, but not enough to cause a panic. That too is part of the ritual. They arrive on horses, wearing blue sashes and unreadable faces. They speak gently. They promise adjustments. One even offers to buy coffee for the first 3 rows of protesters. It's not enough. Someone throws a saucer. A child yells, "Down with dust beans." And suddenly, it's real. A riot, but a distinctly Ottoman one. No screaming, no looting, just passionate waving of cups, increasingly poetic insults, and coordinated banging of spoons against trays. A few clever men start trading prices from rival coffee hanes, stirring competition into rebellion. You sip the last of your coffee and consider joining the chant, but just as suddenly as it begins, it stops. How? The meta arrives. Yes, him again. The storyteller from earlier chapters. Somehow he's here. Same cloak, same crooked smile,
Same walking stick that looks suspiciously like it could be used to stir a very large pot. He steps into the middle of the square, raises a hand, and calls out, "If you'll let me speak, I'll make the beans cheaper with my words." Laughter. Real laughter. Enough to soften the edges. He tells a story about a king who tried to tax the stars, how astronomers rose in protest, how the stars, insulted, refused to shine. By the end, people are chuckling, not because the prices are better, but because once again they feel heard. Historians still argue whether this riot actually lowered prices. Some say it led to a short-term drop in tariffs. Others claim nothing changed at all, and everyone just felt better. But a record does exist. A local coffee-hane reduced its prices by 1 para for a month and added extra foam in honor of the people, which you think is not a bad way to end a rebellion. You walk back to your seat, now cracked slightly from the commotion. Someone hands you a fresh cup. "Still too expensive," they say. "Still worth it," you reply. Steam rises, tension melts, and the city exhales again. The sun has lowered behind the domes of Istanbul, staining the city with that golden forgiving hue that makes even cracked bricks and crooked shutters look noble. You sit on your same cushion, slightly warmer, slightly more familiar, and now it feels less like you're visiting this world, and more like you've always lived here. Your cup is nearly full, but tonight, for the first time, you're in no hurry to drink it. You've seen the beans cross deserts, hide inside barrels, smuggle themselves into treaties. You've watched lovers court with foam, rebels conspire with says, janissaries mark allegiances with tilts of porcelain. You've listened to mystics whisper through the steam and tax collectors mutter about ledgers sticky with honey and lies. And now you wonder, how did all this ritual, this rhythm, this empire of aroma, become the everyday cup on your modern kitchen counter? This is the final pour, the last slow swirl of how Ottoman coffee became the world's brew. The Ottomans never truly let the bean go, not entirely, but like a parent watching a child grow legs and wander, they watched their black elixir cross borders, adopt accents, and return in strange sweetened forms. You're told of the Ottoman envoy to Paris in 1721. Yurmisakiz Mehmed Çelebi. He was sent to charm the French court, but also to observe. He wrote home about fountains, theater, and tightly laced shoes, but he also introduced Turkish coffee service to Versailles. Porcelain cups, long-handled spoons, fragrant cardamom, and a rhythm of serving that Paris had never seen. The French loved it. Within 2 years, Oriental coffee salons opened across the city. Men in turbans served drinks they'd never tasted before. Exotic? Yes. Accurate? Not always, but the aesthetic stuck. In Vienna, after the Battle of 1683, the legend goes that abandoned Ottoman supplies included bags of mysterious dark beans. At first, the Austrians tried feeding them to camels. When that failed, they brewed a cup, and then another. The city was never the same. In London, the first coffee houses were known as penny universities. For the price of a penny, you could buy a cup, and access to heated debates, whispered deals, and a handful of poorly written political pamphlets. Many of these establishments mimicked the Ottoman kahvehane model without even realizing it, and in time, the drink became normalized, less exotic, less dangerous, more domestic. Sugar was added. Milk too. By the 19th century, coffee was no longer the weapon of mystics or the whisper of revolutionaries. It was breakfast. Still, trace it back, and the fingerprints remain. Every time a barista tilts a cup, just so, that's Ottoman etiquette. Every time someone reads your future in the grounds, that's a harem pastime made public. Every time you pause, mid-morning, to sip and reflect instead of rushing into work, you are practicing something that began 500 years ago, in a smoke-filled kahvehane on a crooked Istanbul street. And the empire, it changed too. By the late 19th century, Ottoman cafes became more than just cultural hubs. They were nodes of journalism, of ideology, of modernity. Young Turks debated policy over coffee. Poets published manifestos. Women sat in public cafes, not quietly, but visibly. One report from the 1880s described a new kavihain near Galata, where the waiter served coffee with a pen and paper, encouraging patrons to write down their thoughts. The motto etched on the wall, "A full mind needs a full cup. You finish yours. The grounds are thick. You swirl them once, slowly, watching the sludge settle into vague dreamlike shapes. You think you see a crescent, maybe a lion, maybe nothing at all. Still you smile. Because more than any crown or conquest, coffee is the empire's most lasting gift, not just because it wakes people up, but because it brings them together. From merchants to mystics, from palace to port, from Galata to Galveston, a shared drink, a slow moment, a silent agreement that this matters. And now, in this final hour, you lean back. The kavihain is dim, the coals are nearly out. The spoon beside you rests like a comma at the end of a long wandering sentence. No one speaks. There's nothing left to say, just the warmth of your cup, and the story it tells, even when you're done drinking.
And so, as the fire turns to ash, and the last grounds settle at the bottom of your cup, let it all slow down with you. Let the images soften, like the steam rising gently into the ceiling beams. Let the voices fade, the janissaries debating, the kvechi humming, the mystic whispering a prayer you didn't understand but somehow felt. Let your breath fall into rhythm with it all, slow, steady, like water heating in a sesvi, gentle now, never boiling. The city outside still breathes, but from here it's distant. The domes, the harbor, the endless alleys full of shadows and secrets, they're all folding inward now, like a letter sealed with wax. You've wandered far tonight, across deserts and dynasties, through kitchens and courtrooms, into poetry, policy, and the patient swirl of a spoon held just right. And now, you've earned your rest. Ikavehain is closing, not with a clang, but a sigh. The fire is out. The cups are washed. The chairs tilted against tables look like they too need sleep. So you do what the wise do. You tuck the story into your pocket. You carry it home in your chest. You let your eyes close, not to escape, but to remember. One last breath, one last whisper, and the echo of 1,000 cups shared across centuries lulls you gently into sleep.